Hey y'all, and welcome back to a new video. Today we're going to be looking at a chess game that I just played where I managed to kind of break my losing streak with a very decent positional game that ended off with a very nice tactic. Either way, let's get into the chess. I start off the game with d4, my opponent goes d5, bishop to f4, bishop to f5, and here I play the move c4, which is a move that I very much enjoy playing against this nice little counter London, I guess, where my opponent would just try to London the London. And this kind of spooks them a lot of the time because this means that my opponent doesn't really get what they want and has to play something a little more imbalanced, which of course these counter London players really don't like playing. c4, my opponent goes e6, and for some reason I completely forget all of my theory. It just dissolves out of my memory. And I started playing on instinct here. I have one idea in my brain. I'm pretty sure that this is the correct move. C takes on d5 is what I ended up playing in the game. I'm fairly certain this is the correct move. And after e takes d5, I thought that it was knight to c3. But actually thinking about it now, I'm pretty sure that the move is different, even though I do not remember for the life of me what that move is. Either way, we're just going to play the moves that I actually played during the game, not the moves that I think I remember correctly. Knight to c3 is what I played in the game, and I gave up on one of my ideas and my theory, which is queen b3, targeting these pawns and coming around here. Because after the move c6, I couldn't figure out what I had done wrong. Of course, the knight being on the c3 square hinders the queen from coming over to this square, and the queen is only going to be targeting one pawn now when it comes to the b3 square. So I simply realized, okay, I've messed up. I've clearly messed up in my opening. We're going to be trying something different. And as I'm on my own, I make a mistake. I think for a little bit, and I played the move e3. Which is reasonable. It's not like that bad of a mistake, but the move f3 is actually very strong here. I'm simply going for the move e4, and there's not much my opponent can do about it. For example, queen to e7, I simply go with really anything. Computer likes my position a lot here. Like the top edge move is queen d2, which is kind of interesting. I guess the idea is that, actually, what is the idea here? This is obviously my plan. No, this idea makes a lot more sense. This is another line engine is saying h4, and I guess that the idea here is that if my opponent plays h5, I'm going to play this move knight h3. And yeah, this makes a lot more sense because of course I'm coming around here, and after bishop takes h3, rook takes h3, white is doing very well here, seeing as I'm going to be able to play e4 with no issues. Instead, I played e3, which is fine. Bishop to d6, and here I start not trying to rely on my theory, and I just play normal moves. I go bishop to g3 pretty quickly, knight to f6, and I simply play knight to f3 because why not? I mean, these are very logical developing moves. We do not have to think here. The knight is obviously going to go to f3, and the bishop is probably going to be pretty good on g3, and I couldn't really believe that my opponent really had much of anything here. This move was a little bit scary to me, bishop to g4, but I thought at the end of the day, I can probably even play bishop to d2, bishop to e2 if I'm very scared, but I don't really have to care. Like, I can just play queen b3. And I thought, well, this is fine. This is not good. This is simply just not good. The open g file actually benefits me in a lot of positions, and like this move, while it may look that I have bad structure, the doubled pawns are actually doing a very good job of defending this square, which my opponent would love to put a knight on. Instead, knight f3, my opponent does not play bishop to g4 and instead plays the move h6 after some thought, which is logical. You want to bring the bishop back in many lines here, and some very rare lines you are going to play the move g5. Not here, not in this position. g5 is not on the cards here, but in some lines it is. I think for a little bit I played bishop to d3. Simply I was trying to figure out if this trade with my queen here is good, and I kind of believe that it was, because at the end of the day my queen is a little more active, and even though my opponent has a nice clamp on the queen side, I thought that I'm able to get to this nice juicy little e4 square very, very quickly, and okay, I mean, my position is good. My opponent eventually decides to take on d3. I recapture my queen, of course, and it's not the best move. Okay, it's fine. It's the best move, whatever. And knight to a6 after a long period of time, and this immediately sprang alarm bells in my head, because the point of knight to a6 in many of these lines, my opponent's not going for b5. And that's something that that you learn to kind of avoid, and realize that that's not what your opponent wants when you get stronger. My opponent's not going for b5 because b5 isn't scary. My knight drops to b5, queen b1, at the very least, queen d1 is probably even better, and I'm simply going to be playing the move a3. You're actually helping me get my pawn structure in order, so that move wouldn't actually do anything. It would actually hurt Black better than it helps him. So the idea is that he wants to go knight to c7 and bring the knight over like this. But with this idea, also there's another plan of playing c5, but that's less good because you're giving yourself an isolated pawn in all lines. This idea of knight c7, knight to e6 seemed like the only feasible option for the black pieces, because otherwise, why is the knight on e6? How is the knight going to get back into the game? It's going to come like this? Really? You're going to just go back to b8? No, I do not think so. But with the knight on e6, I couldn't really figure out what it was doing there. Is the idea to try and play the knight here and here? I don't really like that. I mean, trading is always fine in these positions. I haven't committed my king anywhere. Even if I had the open h-file, is not that scary. And if the idea is not that, then what is it? Is it just to go from here to c5 and then put the knight on this square? But you could have done that with the knight on a6. I don't really understand this, so I ended up not caring about my opponent's idea, and I simply played the move knight to e5 because it's a very logical move. It's where the knight wants to go in all variations, and I mean, I thought that it made a lot of sense. Knight to e5, and after my opponent's next move, somehow I'm already in a much better position. Castles, and I simply missed an easy tactic, which is disappointing, but I didn't see this during the game. In fact, I didn't even see it until I am analyzing it right now with y'all. This is not hard. I probably should have seen this, but knight takes c6 is just a free pawn. My bad, didn't see that. Of course, b takes c6. I take the knight on a6, and then I'm up a pawn with some pressure. Yeah, I could have found that. I don't really know why I wasn't able to find that, but it's not like this game is perfect. Never said this game was perfect. Just said it was pretty good. Knight to c6 would have been nice, but I had my eyes set on a different plan, and that plan was to get very, very up and aggressive with my opponent with this idea of queen to f5. And this is okay. There's a couple of plans here. One very, very interesting plan here that I think that is very, very tricky to see is that maybe I have this. Like, if for example, if it's my opponent's move, if it's my move, let's say, how do I make him do something random? Rook b8. I thought knight d7 was a very, very interesting idea, and it's correct because, of course, if queen takes, I will trade the queen here, and in this case we have a fork. But let's just say that we didn't have a fork, and then I just bring the bishop back. I thought this was a pretty decent position to play, because of course I have the bishop, and I thought, okay, well, that seems pretty reasonable to me. There's another line. If my opponent goes here, but then I would simply grab the rook on f8, so he can't do that. And if he takes back with the knight, well, then we take on d6. And imagine if it wasn't a fork. Here. This is the point. Imagine if it wasn't a fork, right? And then I think that white is actually doing pretty well in the position. But my opponent saw it and doesn't allow it with a very, very nice move here. After the move queen to f5, my opponent plays the top engine move, which is a very, very strange move, a very, very mysterious move. My opponent goes with this interesting move, queen to c8. Ooh, not there. Sorry, he plays queen to c8 later. I thought that he played queen to c8 there because it is actually the top engine line of the computer to play queen to c8 right now. Either way, I thought that's what he played. It doesn't matter. Instead, he goes bishop to e7, which is logical, defending the knight. and making sure he was like doing everything correctly. Also, another point of queen f5 that I didn't mention, I'm trying to induce the move g6. G6 is not a good move. First of all, I can sacrifice, takes, and sorry, knight takes g6, f takes e6, and then here, and then we pick up the bishop. But even if here, king to h8, this is still a good position, and not king to g8. Knight to h7 doesn't actually work due to bishop g6. So king to g8. So king to g8 is the only move, and at the end of the day, I at least have a perpetual check. But I probably have even more, and I can go for more here. Instead, queen f5, bishop to e7, very, very nice move, just simply defending the knight. And I think for a long time, and I could not find a move for me. I really, really, really did not want to castle. That's one thing I just did not want to do in this position, because I thought castling in some lines here, I thought maybe I'm able to play like h4, h5, and like bring my rook in. And if I castle, that whole idea is gone. So I wanted to hold my cards in my hand for a decent bit of time, and I thought that castling just kind of gave up the element of like trickery. It kind of like gave up exactly what I was going to do, and I didn't want him to know exactly what I was going to do. So I thought for like a minute and a half, and I play a very random move. I simply play the move a3, which is fine, but like you see the time spent, 7:55 to 6:36, a lot of time spent on this move. I really should not have done this. This is not correct. A3 on its own is fine. The reason it's bad is because I spent so much time here. And now the position is kind of starting to heat up, and I was a little bit worried about this idea of c5 at some point in these positions, because if I take, well, then my opponent's able to get the knight in. He has some weak light squares here, and I was just a little bit worried about this position here. Of course, I would have probably played castles, but even here already it's equal. Castles isn't even the best move, which is a little bit crazy. And if I castle, which is the top edge move, I was just a little bit worried about this position. A little bit worried about this position, like knight c7. I don't know. But either way, you can see where I'm getting my worried. So a3, and my opponent here now plays the move queen to c8, which is a move that I really did not believe at the time. Queen to c8 is an excellent move by my opponent, because it just kind of stops everything that I'm trying to do. Now, after queen to c8, obviously if I trade the queens, I wouldn't have any more attack, and I don't really like the position. It's heading toward the endgame, where it'll probably be a draw, and I want to win the game, of course. So I can't trade, and after the simple move queen to f3, which I play in like 30 seconds because I was trying to find something, now my opponent is able to like get like some interesting play here, with ideas such as queen to e6, for example, getting his queen involved, and the attack is not really going to be that powerful. However, he plays rook to e8, I think, for a little bit, and I eventually play the move bishop to h4, inducing g5, because g5 would be a very terrible move, weakening the king beyond comprehension, and I would be able to play this move h4 very, very soon with a monster attack. But after queen to e6, which is what my opponent played, now I didn't really know what else to do, because he's kind of taken away all of my elements of attack, and like, I mean, the knight's defended. There's nothing that I'm going for. Of course, I might have taken the knight originally, but like, unless he does something stupid like bishop to e6, like, this position is fine for black. This position is fine for black. I can tell here that this position is probably equal, and I've probably bungled some advantage that I had. I really did think I had an advantage, and now it's just, how can I do something interesting here? Eventually, after a long time, I end up castling, which is disappointing, because it's not a move I wanted to play. Of course, I wanted to keep my rook on the h-file, and I wanted to keep my king in the center to make him not know where I'm going to be. And I thought that in some lines, in some very mysterious lines, there are lines where both of us open up the g-file, and I enjoyed my king not being over here, because with the king over here, the g-file is an issue, and with my king in the center, well, the g-file is an issue. The g-file is just great for me, and I can long castle, right? But either way, I digress. My opponent plays not a very good move here. My opponent messes up. My opponent messes up pretty substantially. Here, actually, he has to play this a nice tactic of knight to c5. I can't take, because taking here is very good for black. My pawn is a very weak pawn, and I would end up being a pawn down in most lines. Instead of that, he doesn't find it, and without doing that, he would have to bring his knight back another way, either knight to c7 or knight to b8. He's not able to do that, and he instead thinks of a different idea. He plays the move knight to h7, which is a very interesting move, simply going for a bishop trade. And now I have to kind of think about what I'm doing. The bishop trade doesn't seem viable for me. From a distance, the bishop trade did not seem like something I wanted to do, because I'm very like infatuated with an attack here. I really wanted to attack, and with one more piece off the board, then there's less of an attack, and I think I'm kind of like slowing down on the gas here, which is not something that I want to do. But I realized that if I play bishop to g3, well, that's not what I want to do either. Like, I don't want my bishop on g3. Like, the bishop is just not doing a whole lot there. And and even like queen to g5, knight to g5, and I'm not even sure if I like my position anymore. So I ended up forcing myself to take the bishop. Rook takes e7, and I play the move b4 after some thought, with another idea. Now the idea is that I want to put my knight on c5. Pretty simple stuff, but at some point it's useful. Also, clear idea first of all, b5 is a big threat if my opponent does anything. Yeah, sure. b5 is going to do a lot of damage to the black position. Of course, after takes, you're letting my knight in, but even more importantly than that, I'm taking on d5 here, which is very nice. And after takes, you can see my knights are in the center. I already have a passed pawn. These are kind of awkward double pawns, and my opponent is going to have a hard time getting his knight back into the game. For example, rook to e8. We already have knight takes f7 with check, and it's a tough position to play. Anyway, of course, he plays knight to c7, stopping this, stopping b4, and I go with my plan. I go knight to a4, and clear idea, I'm going to the c5 square. My opponent doesn't know that. He either is lying to himself or is not that cut out for chess. Knight is going to c5 square. What are you going to do about it? You can either ignore it or do something about it. And eventually, my opponent does something about it, but the something that he does, I think, is not a very good move. He plays the move queen to f6, which, just looking at it, seems wrong, because my queen is not the one that wants to be on f3. My queen would much rather be on the g3 square, which I play very quickly, because, okay, well, now I'm targeting the king. You can't go here in any line. Queen to g5, I don't think that this is correct, because now I can simply play knight to c5, takes, and even take with the f pawn, but taking with the h pawn is of course a lot better. And now there's like serious issues. You cannot play b6 due to knight to c6 attacking the rook. And I already think that in that position, white would be like nearly winning here after the queen trade. It's very difficult to play. You have to play passive defense, which is not something that someone wants to do. But instead, my opponent goes knight to g5. And after a long think here, I was able to figure out that after knight to c5, I didn't see a move for black, because if my opponent goes here, I thought I was just better. I thought here, and I didn't really see a way for him to defend the pawn after like even something as interesting as normal as queen to g4. There is a way. My opponent can just go here, and after takes, there's f6, right, winning my knight. So I would have to do something different. But in any way, the pawn is a little bit weak, and I thought that, okay, in any case, white is probably better. So he doesn't do that, and he cannot play this move b6, because I thought that I could play knight c back to the d3 square. And what I'm doing, I'm going to put a rook on the c-file. This pawn is a huge weakness. You can play this, but after like even something as queen, like queen to h3, even queen to g4 here, but this is not that good. Even something like queen to h3, rook to c1 is incoming and it is impossible to prevent. So white is much better because of this pawn. So what is he supposed to do? He thinks for a long time, and eventually plays a different move. He plays knight to e8 after a long think. Because in some lines, if my opponent does nothing, let's say this move, knight e to d7, hits the queen, hits the knight, I win the game. That simple as that. Simple as that. I'm going to win the game. Of course, the queen is opened up against the knight. So my opponent has something to think about. Knight to e8 is meant to disallow that idea. But my plans are very, very simple. I ended up playing this move f4 after a decent bit of time because I realized that the move knight to e6 is just losing. The queen is trapped, like almost trapped. The queen is almost trapped here, which is a little insane. Queen to g6, f5 is basically enough. Look at the queen. Look at the queen. It's almost completely dead. Like the top engine move here, knight takes d4. Something very, very difficult to find. Sacking the knight, going for this and this. Of course, I cannot take due to knight to e2. Here. I guess I can take, but I don't want to take. Like, I guess I can throw in knight to e2. Oh, king to f2 is the idea. After takes, I can take back. Oh, I can take here first. Takes king to g3. Oh, and that's better. Yeah. Either way, like I'm saying, the position is very, very difficult. And my opponent is going to have a hard time playing it. He ends up playing the move knight to e4, which I just immediately believed is just wrong. Knight to h7 is the only move to play in this position. Because if you don't play this move, which also just looks stupid, it looks like a bad move, then after knight to e4, the only difference, knight takes e4, d takes e4, and I just play f5. And the pawn is like almost lost. The pawn is very, very close to being lost. It's a difficult pawn to defend. And f5 is doing a very, very good job of like preventing any of these g6s. My opponent probably has to play queen to d6, go trying to like make f6 happen, maybe make the queen come to, maybe knight come to f6, sorry, to defend the pawn. But either way, it's a difficult position to play. So f5, and my opponent blunders here. My opponent simply makes a huge mistake. He plays a move that makes sense. It makes sense. He plays knight to d6. And the idea of this move is targeting the pawn, defending his own pawn. And it's difficult for white. Like if I do like something average, like let's say rook ac1, I mean, we lose the pawn, right? And it's not what we want. So let's say we play rook f4. The idea is, of course, after knight takes f5, we can play queen to f2, g6, and g4 would win the knight. Tricky stuff. But either way, there's one move here that completely wins. The very, very simple move, knight back to g4. And in this position, my opponent can already resign. Because if you take this pawn now, knight takes f6 is with a check. With a check, right? So you don't have enough time to take my queen yourself. And the queen, wherever it moves, if the queen goes to the g5 square, which is the only move for the queen, then I'm going to take the knight. You're going to take my knight, and I'm going to pick up your rook. And I'm just simply going to be up a rook. Sure, you can grab a pawn. But after king h1, there's nothing here. And that's what he goes for. He has to go for it. Otherwise, he's just losing. Queen to g5. Queen takes d6. And he ends up deciding against taking my knight and instead goes for rook a to e8. Of course, you got to go for it. Rook a to e8, defending the other rook, and maybe there's issues. But I can just threaten a queen trade. Queen to f4, targeting the queen, threatening the queen trade. Of course, queen takes queen is completely lost. I'm simply up a knight here. There's nothing to be done. Knight also has a great square here, and if ever f6, the knight has a great square here. There's no stopping me. There's no stopping me. I'm just gonna keep going until my opponent is literally dead. which is nice. So he plays one of the only moves, queen to h4. But now we already see that if I want to, I can play knight takes h6. Like, this is completely winning. Obviously not what we want, but like this is a winning endgame. Just saying, I'm up 2 pawns. I'm up 1 pawn, and like my opponent has a lot of weaknesses here, and I'm able to get my rooks involved. Like rook f5, rook comes here, rook comes here, rook comes here, here, right? Game over. But of course, we don't have to do that. We don't have to be very silly. I simply play move f6, which is a nice move, hitting the rook. My opponent's only move is g5, which he finds, attacking my queen. And after queen to f5, well, it's pretty simple what's going to happen here. My opponent's about to get checkmated. Rook to e6, knight e5, and the simple threat here is knight takes f7. And it is basically impossible to stop. My opponent tries queen to h5. I don't care. g4. You either lose a queen or you lose the game. My opponent chooses to lose the game. Queen to h3, knight takes f7, and it's over. Simply over. Queen takes e3. King. I just played rook f2 because I thought it made the most sense. I can play king h1. Doesn't matter. Rook f2, and after rook to f8, it's a simple mate in 1. Of course, if you take this pawn, if you take the knight, it's easy. Queen h7, queen g7. This is the idea of knight takes f7. But it's nice that I'm able to win a game for once. Nice that I'm able to win a game for once. In the game before this, I also won pretty easily. So maybe I'm back. Maybe I'm able to play chess again. Hopefully, after a disaster of last game, I'm glad to be able to pick up some wins, pick up a good game at, what was this, 92.8% accuracy with a 2600 estimated rating. That's pretty good. That's pretty good. Yeah, but that's it. I hope you guys enjoyed. Hope I found this entertaining, instructive, all the above. If you did, remember to like, subscribe, do all the normal things YouTubers tell you to do. And yeah, that's all I've got for you today. Good evening and good night.